Yeah.
We're live.
It's Senate Transportation. It's Tuesday, the 15th of April, tax day. And I hope you all got your taxes done. It's always a killer. But we're at tax day and we are here to go through the Senate version of the T-bill.
Hey, good morning. For the record, I'm Damian Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. Just as an aside, I do have to step out at 10:30 to go down the hall, and then I'll be back at 11, hopefully earlier, but.
And what is in yellow, we haven't agreed to.
Yes, that's new language or language that hasn't been agreed to yet. Or hasn't been reviewed yet by the committee.
Okay.
So the first, this is language on federal funding updates from the Agency of Transportation. This is on page 4, section 3. This would require on or before June 30th, September 30th, and December 15th, that the secretary or the agency submit a written report to the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee regarding the status of federal funding for the FY26 program, including any reductions, any rescissions of federal grants, and any delays in anticipated federal funding. The report shall include a summary of federal funding received to date, federal funding that's anticipated later in the fiscal year, federal funding that is subject to a delay, and federal funding that has been reduced or subject to rescission. A summary of any delays in projects authorized for the FY26 transportation program caused by those federal funding reductions or delays. Proposed changes to any projects authorized in FY26, including whether the secretary anticipates or intends to utilize any of the Secretary's authority under 19 VSA 10G to reallocate funding or advance certain projects, and whether any portion of the FY26 transportation program will be subject to an expenditure reduction plan under 32 VSA 704. Just for a reminder, folks, under 19 VSA 10G, there's limited authority for the Secretary to reallocate funding if, for example, funding is delayed for one project. You can advance another project that's in the 5-year program with available funding. And there are a couple of other instances there, emergencies, things like that. And then the expenditure reduction plan happens when there's a 1% reduction in T-fund revenues. The Secretary of Administration and Secretary of Transportation would work together to develop a plan to accommodate that reduction. That has to get approved by the Joint Fiscal Committee. If it's more than 1%, if it's less than 1%, it can be done just by the Secretary of Administration or with the consent of the Secretary of Administration. And then the Secretary of Administration just provides an update to the Joint Fiscal Committee. This section, importantly, will also provide for requiring any plan to be approved by JTOC, so Joint Transportation Oversight, and we'll get to that in just a second.
But this language exactly tracks on what Joint Fiscal would do.
So the language later on tracks Joint Fiscal's requirements. The language is pretty broad and there is a lot of language in Joint Fiscal about what has to be in the reduction plan that I didn't put in here since they'll already be preparing that. But as far as the approval, I did put that in here.
Okay.
So I did require a detailed summary of the expenditure reduction plan be provided to JTOC, and finally, as well as a description of any legislative action that may be necessary. And then subsection B provides that any plan to address a reduction of 1% or more would have to be approved by JTOC prior to implementation. And then at any time that the federal funding is reduced by 1% or more, the Secretary of Transportation may also request that JTOC meet within 14 days to review a plan to address the reduction in funding. So you have 3 basic reports, which would probably trigger 3 meetings of JTOC over the interim. And then there's an ability for the secretary to request a meeting at any time if there is a sudden change in federal funding that the secretary believes warrants that. Important to note, this language has not been run by the agency, so you're going to want to let them review it and give you feedback on it. So
I would say the only party that's not on JTOC in this whole process, well, not on the Joint Fiscal Committee, is the chair of House Transportation. Because the JTOC committee is the money chairs, which are all on Joint Fiscal. I'm on Joint Fiscal, but the chair of House Transportation is not on Joint Fiscal.
Oh.
So the 1% language that tracks that would allow in the input of the chair of transportation in the House.
Being a JTOC.
Because it would have to come in front of JTOC.
right.
And the 1% is the tracking of the exact language for joint fiscal.
And I know within the big bill, the Appropriations Committee, as 2/5 of this committee are aware, is also working on language around federal funding contingencies. So one thing that I do want to flag is as we move forward with this, we just want to make sure that while the authority is likely to have some overlap, that it doesn't actually, we don't end up with contradictory or interfering authority. So, and I've been in touch with the folks in our office who are working on that language, so we're trying to stay in touch as well. And I'm also working with our colleagues in JFO. So hopefully when everything reaches the finish line here, all the language will work out and continue to work with each other.
Does the committee want time to review this more? Are we ready to go with this? What's the pleasure of the committee? Go ahead.
Do we mention that the agency hasn't reviewed this, or have they?
The agency is not reviewed.
Well,
Yeah.
we should probably hear from the agency.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so the agency has not had a chance to review this. The draft was finally finished and edited early this morning. So,
I think
yeah, I'm sure that
some
they're
of
going
this-
to want to wait.
some of this they have reviewed, but some of it.
Yeah, I got some input on dates from them. There is the June 30th date was not a date that had been suggested by the agency. That was a date I came up with the chair yesterday. Because that sort of leads into the coming fiscal year. And then September 30th and December 15th would be sort of mid to late construction season, and then after the construction season is finished. So those are 2 other updates there. There certainly, I have not reviewed and discussed the language around the reporting requirements and the requirements for approval of reduction plans and so forth with the agency.
So the 1% language the agency hasn't got to review. We should probably let it, but it does exactly track what they would have to do in front of joint fiscal.
Correct.
Yeah. Current, if it goes over 1%, they have to bring it all to joint fiscal. There's a piece of this that I look at it and think the JTOC committee, it would probably be good if both House and Senate transportation committees were represented.
Okay. After that section, we can flip through. There were, I want to flag just in section 7, we made some changes to correct the penalty, so it refers back to the existing penalty in law. In working with the AOT staff, I caught a couple of small typos in there, a missing A and a missing or. And then, so I made those corrections. Let's see. I do want to flag that in section 10, the Green Mountain Transit Authority, yesterday afternoon, I received a proposal for new language from AOT and Green Mountain Transit. And I did not have a chance to incorporate that in. So I want to flag that if the committee is amenable to that, I'll have that in the next draft. Okay, seeing.
Travis. Well,
It's separate and in the draft.
It's not in the draft right now. So I can add that in or add it in
Well, highlight it however you do,
Yeah.
so we know it's separate.
right. And it's the intent is to clarify and address a couple of additional issues that have been flagged as this process has gone on. So it relates to things like other transit providers providing commuter services into Chittenden County and so forth. And so I can put that in. Draft.
Can I make a comment on this or just
Sure.
suggestion? Just, I would think that our service is going to change throughout time. I mean, that should be an expectation, I think. And we might just want to have the agency have the authority to be able to change service and just have the statute have goals for the service. That might be too much to do now, but it just seems overly restrictive to have statute say exactly where the different providers work.
So I think the challenge we've got is that 50 years ago, the General Assembly decided that this transit agency, because of the funding opportunities provided if it became a political subdivision of the state, should be chartered. And so when we've got that, we do have some restrictions. I will say that the language that was, and you sort of have to have these guidelines of like, what is their jurisdiction
Okay.
and so forth. I will say the language that was provided to me yesterday, if anything, is even more open and inclusive of changing that service and reflecting what the current service is.
Great.
So
And
Yeah.
Chittenden is the only one that has this specific kind of language in the statutes. Is that?
Green Mountain Transit
Or Green Mountain.
is the only transit authority that has this language.
Okay.
All the others are enacted pursuant to statutory provisions that sort of guide how they're created, but they aren't actually created by statute.
Okay, great.
If that makes sense.
Yes, that's
So I'm still working through the coffee here. So these sentences are challenging
It's
at
working.
times.
thank you.
But anyway, I will get that language in. And let's see. Okay, so the next change is going to be all the way down, I think, on page 18, section 12. This is, so if you remember, Jeremy Reed was in here last week and he presented 3 proposed reports from the agency. This is the first of them. And this would address the cancellation of locally managed projects under 19 VSA 309C. So originally when the T-bill was being worked on in the House, the agency had presented some language to update that section, to allow for the recapture of both state and federal funds. Currently, the statute mentions federal funds, but does not mention state. Concerns were raised by the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies. That language was pulled because they were unable to come up with compromise language in time for crossover. So my understanding is that the agency has proposed this language here so that they can figure out the nuances and the issues and bring us language next year as part of that report.
So, and we do, I think, have the planning commissions, regional planning commissions coming in on Thursday.
So section 13, which starts at the bottom of that page and goes on to page 19. This is what I like to think of as the 4th grade potholes section. This is our discussion about municipal needs and how to begin tracking what those needs are so we can better target the funding.
So 13 is, you're gonna change the title to the Union Street 4th grade.
That's right. The Union Elementary
Pothole.
Municipal Needs Assessment Study. Yes.
We had that one kid that
there's 20.
said the pothole at the bottom of her driveway.
Yes. It's a big one.
Well, it is Montpelier.
That is true. Oh boy. Yeah, I've got to avoid personal comment here, so let's stay away from Montpelier's potholes. So this language here, the original language that Chair, I believe, had asked for AOT to come back with some modified language, and so they sent that over the weekend. I want to say that I really appreciate how helpful they've been in getting things nights and weekends. So they've been working a lot of overtime. And so this is based off of that language and would require a report back on current municipal practices for tracking these needs, developing a framework for a system to assess current condition, developing prioritization process for state funding so that it goes to the roads that are most needed and have the largest impact on the regional transportation networks. Recommending potential statutory changes to implement that framework. And that report is due back in January 15th, 2027. So that is, and I should note, all of these are written reports. If there's a desire to switch this to an oral report or something like that, we can make that change. I just default to a written report.
That's a question. In this section, Friday, does it say who is this? The consultant would be hired,
Yes.
obviously outside of the agency. Who foots the bill for that? All three folks, or is that?
I believe that's coming out of the AOT appropriation. So they're just in consultation with the other entities.
Yeah.
The other entities can consult as much as they're willing to, but they're not driving the actual report.
Okay, so
I particularly appreciate the piece from the agency about the prioritization. You know, we have in any region, you have those specific highways that are links to the state highway system that we all use and would be a Town Hill Road, for example. Between Route 2 and over, if anything happens to Route 2, there's an accident at that roundabout. It's the only way around. So. Thank you.
And then section 14 is a report, again, in consultation with the league and VAPTA. AOT would engage a consultant to evaluate the state's town highway aid and municipal grant programs that are administered by the agency to identify potential efficiencies and improvements related to how they're administered. And I've singled out the funding streams authorized in 19 VSA 306, which is the various town highway aid programs, as well as programs administered through the agency's Municipal Assistance Bureau, including the Bicycle and Pedestrian Grant Program, Transportation Alternatives Program, Municipal Mitigation Program, Municipal Park and Ride Program, Better Roads Program, Municipal Highway and Stormwater Mitigation Program, and Grants and Aid. And I do want to note that anytime we say including, just as a reminder, it means including but not limited to. So if I left one out, it'd still be included. That is a very long list of aid programs. And this is a January 15th, 2026 report back to these committees with the findings and any recommendations for legislative action or administrative action to improve or increase the efficiency of those programs. Okay, in the mileage-based user fee, there were date changes to January 1, 2027, which I have not highlighted, that we discussed last time. I have highlighted on page 21 some clarifications in items 3 and 4 in the intent section. So the first is to work towards collecting a fee on kilowatt hours that are dispensed through certain electric vehicle supply equipment available to the public so as to supplant lost fuel tax revenue from out-of-state plug-in electric vehicles traveling in Vermont. And 4 is to not commence collecting a mileage-based user fee until the General Assembly has enacted legislation that establishes the amount of the fee and codifies any necessary authorizing language in statute, and that legislation becomes effective.
And the technical amendment on 3
Sure.
kilowatt hours, you don't pluralize it. You don't put an S when it's more than 1 kilowatt. That's KWH, whether it's 1 or not.
Okay. I will
Okay.
make that change. Thank you.
At least that's the way I was. You could check.
I'll make a note here and I will look in our style guide and figure out whether we should singularize that. So
So
the one
there
thing-
isn't such a thing as kilowatts.
There is. You can spell it out, you would say kilowatts with plural, but when you're using the KWH, I never seen a plural, an S on the end.
Okay.
So we go per KWA.
You could say that.
you could also say a fee on electricity that is dispensed through.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to note on number 3, it's intent language, so it's non-binding. But if we do get to the point of collecting a fee on energy dispensed through public charging, we will have to tread carefully to make sure that it doesn't violate the Interstate Commerce Clause or create an unfair restriction on interstate travel to avoid potential constitutional challenges. So that I just want to flag that. The out-of-state plug-in electric vehicles language just shot up a red flag in my head. And so that
If it was only on that state, you wouldn't be able to do it.
right, it'd also be extremely hard to track who is out of state and who is not without collecting a great deal more data from the entities there, or having them sort of flag transactions. So there are a number of complications with that, but there are also ways where you could collect that and then reduce the mileage-based user fee potentially. All I'm saying is that if you do decide to move down that road, we'll just need to be careful to avoid any potential constitutional missteps. So
You might want to add that part of the intent is not to double charge those paying a mileage-based user fee, which this doesn't mention. I mean, maybe you think that part of it because the intent is to do it only out of state, but people could say, well, the intent was to get it out of state, and we're doing that, even though we're double taxing that people paying the MBUF.
Right.
So, so if another state looked at, the odometer and they did odometer instead of something, an electronic system, and they were paying off from the odometer, you wouldn't charge this? Is that what you're trying to get at?
Well, yeah. If you could do that, that would be difficult. Or you'd have to have some kind of refund process and be like, I paid this much fee at the charging station, so I should get that reduced from my MBUF fee or something like that. But that part of my intent, at least is saying that we're not double taxing people that are paying by mileage. Like if they're charging at a public station that's also has a charge on the kilowatt hours, then they should be paying both.
Okay.
There's also, I assume there are multiple ways to get at this. You could also say, instead of to work towards collecting a fee, to examine collecting a fee
Yeah.
on kilowatt hours or on energy dispensed through certain electric vehicle supply equipment, so
Yeah.
as to supplant lost fuel tax revenue.
So
So,
to examine.
yeah.
Instead of work, I would support that. I think that's
Yeah.
better.
That probably would be clearer.
all right. And then it's also, if I understand some of the testimony we've gotten, this is the less immediately implementable
Yeah.
sort of option for us. And so this can allow continued work on that. But at the end of the day, it is intent language, and it's shows the direction we want to head at, but it is not creating a binding sort of requirement. Okay. If we can move down to page 25. This is updated intent language. And so this provides that it is the intent of the General Assembly that the mileage-based user fee be approximately equivalent to the average amount collected by the state in fuel tax revenue from the use of non-plug-in electric vehicle pleasure cars registered in Vermont, and the average amount collected by the state in fuel tax revenue and electric vehicle infrastructure fee from the use of a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle pleasure car. And so that is, I think, takes out the federal tax piece and it focuses on the average. And so that, I think, captures everything that the committee was looking for last time.
And pleasure car is defined.
Yes, pleasure car is a light truck or passenger vehicle.
And that's what the registered as.
Yeah,
Right. I just couldn't remember.
Yeah.
What all vehicles are included.
yeah. So that excludes things like heavy trucks, farm vehicles.
Yeah. Heavy is over 10,000 pounds or what?
I think so. Yeah. And then the new second paragraph there provides that the mileage-based user fee that is implemented beginning on January 1, 2027 will be an interim step towards gradually expanding the mileage-based user fee to all motor vehicles. Okay. All right, and then
Does it mean, do we need the date in there? January 1st, 2027? What if it gets implemented on February 1st, 2027? Does it not count?
we could really strike out that is implemented beginning on January 1, 2027.
Just in case there's a shift in the date.
Happy to do that.
So you want, excuse me, go ahead.
Just in case the date shifts, you don't have to limit it to one that starts on that date. So you would just say that is implemented,
Mhm.
be an interim, whenever it could be.
So we take the date out
We
completely.
take it beginning on January 1st, 2027. Or you,
I would take out that as implemented as well. So you're just saying the mileage-based user fee for those cars will be an interim step,
Okay,
whenever it's implemented.
Saving words. That's efficiency.
Doing good work here, folks. So the mileage-based user fee funding design and updates report here requires AOT to report to JTOG on or before September 30th and December 15th. Regarding the status of federal grants and other funding for the design of the EMBA, as amended by this act, and the agency's progress in designing the mileage-based user fee. So this is just an update on whether the grant funding has come through and been received by the state, and then how things are going with the work on designing that. And I chose the dates to coincide with the other JTOC reports, so that we aren't running dates all over the place. Again, I have not run these dates by the agency, so it would be good to get their feedback on whether this is doable and reasonable. Okay, sections 19 to 22 are brand new. This is from Kurtzville. This is the consideration of vehicle miles traveled and project planning with amendments proposed by the agency. So section 19 would update 19 VSA 1 to add a definition of vehicle miles traveled.
We need that just for this section, or there isn't a current definition? There,
Not in Title 19, so that's adding it for Title 19. Or for 19 VSA Chapter 1. So, and then in 19 VSA 10B, the subsection A there requires the agency to develop a mission statement to reflect a variety of things. And what we've added is in number 2, it's now providing that transportation projects, or the need for transportation projects that will improve the state's economic infrastructure, use resources in efficient, coordinated, integrated, cost-effective, and environmentally sound ways, and new language, reduced vehicle miles traveled within the state when feasible. And that will be consistent with the recommendations of the Comprehensive Energy Plan issued under 30 VSA 202B. My understanding on the when feasible addition to that is that this is reflecting that there are certain transportation projects where a reduction in vehicle miles traveled isn't necessarily possible or feasible because it's just repairing existing transportation infrastructure. It's not like replacing a bridge where you can add a pedestrian or bike lane to the bridge by widening the bridge with the new structure or something like that.
okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a question about the definition of vehicle miles traveled,
Sure.
because I've heard it used as like when you're looking at the impact of a new development, and I think that is one of the intents. But I've heard it used in the aggregate and in the singular. So I think it would be helpful to have a definition that could be like a typical vehicle mile. You know, the miles that a typical vehicle would travel under whatever circumstances or whatever kind of vehicle, like, versus traveled by all motor vehicle trips. To me, all motor vehicle trips means all of the vehicles travel distance. I don't know if that was the intent.
So in working with the sponsors of Kurtzville, my understanding was the intent was to reduce the amount of miles traveled by motor vehicles within an area. So that could mean that you're shortening trips, but it could also mean that you're providing the opportunity for drivers to get out of their car and use a bike or walk or use public transportation instead, which wouldn't be reflected in the average miles traveled for a vehicle, but it would be reflected in the sum of the vehicle miles traveled there. So if you took 10% of cars off the road, your estimated sum would go down roughly correspondingly, depending on how the project's
Right.
worked out. And so that was my understanding there, was to actually see a reduction in the actual total number of vehicle miles traveled in the area, rather than in shortening the trips, which could result in that reduction too, but not necessarily.
Right. I just think it would be helpful to have definitions of more than one thing. This is just the total, right?
Right.
And you might want the total for passenger cars, you might want the total for trucks, you might want, I mean, there's just so many different categories that I think it would be helpful to have a definition that isn't only the total.
Okay.
But maybe we could just,
Well, so
I think
Use-
that's-
I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate that into sort of guiding policy for the agency. So these are sort of like this is sort of broad guidance for the agency. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that you may want to look at reducing like heavy truck miles traveled, or pleasure car miles traveled, or something
Yeah.
like that.
or even just track it. I mean, just, this is a pretty fundamental definition.
Right.
Vehicle miles traveled. It could be one vehicle, it could be 20 vehicles, you could be looking at school vehicles, you could be looking at transit vehicles. I just don't think it should be all motor
Okay.
vehicle, the all is,
So
my concern.
what if the language was by all, or a specific by all motor vehicle trips, or by all trips of a specific type of motor vehicle?
I'm thinking if you just deleted
I've
that.
got Pat's hand in there. Yeah.
I'm just reading this, and this is a definition of vehicle miles traveled. It doesn't matter what you're driving. It says it's the estimated sum of miles traveled by all motor vehicles. I think if you broke it out into categories, you'd still have the same definition for each category. It's the
Mhm.
vehicle miles traveled for all those categories. So this does lump everybody into the definition, but that's what the definition is. In my head, that's the way I read
You
it.
know, is it just the word all that is?
Yes, yes.
So if it
I
read
think-
the estimated sum of the miles traveled by motor vehicle trips within a specific area during a calendar year.
I mean, that would be better.
And he's got,
I mean, I think for this purpose, I can see why you might want that data, but I think for this section, we don't talk about the needing to know what the breakout is of different vehicle types. So I wouldn't want to change this definition, because I think this is the definition as used based nationally. And when you talk about BMP, this is the definition that's about all vehicles travel. And then you're just trying to get the miles down of how many vehicles are traveling on the roads by public transportation. Usually or bikes or pedestrian trips. So I think if there was a separate thing you're trying to get at about the vehicle trips by different vehicle types, I would think that would be a separate definition, not try to include it in this definition.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I was just looking for flexibility, but
I mean, the language here is really just related to transportation planning policy. So, you're looking at the transportation planning process. So when they're looking at this, when they're, for example, in section 21, we're providing that in choosing between the improvement of an existing highway and complete reconstruction, the agency shall weigh the following factors. And we're adding, so two of the factors are the impact on historic, scenic, and aesthetic values as interpreted by the municipality in which the highway is located. If it's a forest highway under federal jurisdiction, and then opportunities to reduce vehicle miles traveled or otherwise reduce greenhouse gas emissions related to the highway. So it's sort of this broad idea of are there opportunities here to provide for alternative forms of transportation? And I don't know the extent to which the agency is currently measuring vehicle trips broken out by types of vehicle, or even has the capability to do that. But I can see the interest in getting information on that. We definitely have roads that are heavy truck routes and suffer a great deal more wear
Right.
because of that fact. But I don't know how that's measured, and I would have to defer to the agency to speak to that. But with all of these, it's sort of a general planning consideration to be taken into account, along with a number of other sort of general considerations.
No, I understand that, and they do that now.
Oh.
They're looking at impact fees.
I'm sorry, I need to be down the hall. Thank you, Senator. I'm scheduled down the hall. I will be back shortly. I'm sorry about
Don't
that.
know which way.
In Senate Economic Development,
That's down the hall and then around the corner.
What do you think?
Another
15 minutes to half an hour?
15 to 30 minutes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're doing a primer on building codes and universal design, so for the housing bill.
Fun.
It is.
No, it is. Well,
Yeah, if you want later, we can talk about energy efficient assemblies for your residential building, pros and cons.
Would you like to start commenting on, we could start with, federal funding updates and
Thank you. For the record, Michelle Boomhauer, Vermont Agency of Transportation. So, I don't have a copy of the bill, printed yet. Thank you. That's very helpful. So with regards to, the new section 3, I have already sent this to our staff to review, and we'll have feedback for you tomorrow
okay.
on this section. So there's a lot of information here to digest as it relates to other information we file with fiscal, and also our ability to prepare the information under the timeframes you've asked for. So we will get back to you related to that.
I would say the 1% language that is added is really just like joint fiscal.
Yes.
And you have to go in front of joint fiscal anyways.
Yes.
And when I looked at that, and not always is there going to be, because somebody will look at this in the future when they do that, but not always is there going to be the chair of Senate Transportation on it. But in this particular case, the only person that's left out of this whole is the chair of Transportation in the House.
Correct. Thank you. All right. I'll skip over the Green Mountain Transit language since we don't have that drafted in front of us. And the next section were the reports. I know Jeremy has already been in to testify related to the reports. We've had conversations about these. I would ask the committee if there are any questions about the report frameworks. It's
No, I think we hashed that out pretty well.
right. If I may, Mr. Chair, I'd like to defer to my colleague, Patrick Murphy, related to the section 15 and sections related to the mileage-based user fee.
Certainly.
Comments there. So, there.
Thank you. For the record, Patrick Murphy, Vermont Agency of Transportation, and have section 15 for kilowatt hour fee language. What we had suggested was just something more broad. Because I think the committee had raised concerns about a per kilowatt hour fee and the potential for double taxation, and we had the same concerns in working through a road usage charge study. But we had talked as well about how we evolve a system that accounts at some point for out of state travel within the state of Vermont. And so we, you could look at just basically working towards or exploring a fee to supplant the lost fuel tax revenue from out of state PUDs and leave out per kilowatt hours entirely, which could include a per kilowatt hour fee if that's deemed feasible in the future, but it might be some other thing that we've talked about
Right. It'd be like a per charge.
So
A fee.
Let me make a comment on this one.
Sure.
Because I listened to this, it was a really good conversation. But I just have a concern. Just generally, I wanted to think about it, just our revenues are not what we need now. So I don't want us to limit the revenue that we can get from a new source to just what we already know is an insufficient amount. So I'm not suggesting any different language, but I just think we should have that in mind.
yeah, thank you. And so part of the discussion we had last week was about making sure that when we do set a rate for this fee, that we think about not just where we are right now, but how do we sort of make up some of the lost ground that you saw in presentations by John Fiscal about, 10 years ago, we were at, in 2024 dollars, 41 cents per gallon. And so not wanting to kind of start from behind with a new fee and how you incrementally work towards raising sufficient revenue to sustain the transportation system.
And let me just add, but fairness is important.
Sure.
So that was part of the conversation, was what was fair. And I don't know if we have any language about fairness. Maybe we don't need it, but fairness and not limiting ourselves to insufficient revenues, which is where we're.
Fairness was definitely a key part of our considerations throughout the study and looking into implementation. And it's, of course, in the eye of the holder, what fairness is.
It is.
It's
Usually our goal.
Yep.
So that was the section 15 per kilowatt hour fee language. Section 16 was intent. I think the state tax equivalent, approximately equivalent to the state tax revenue. That is what we originally had proposed in House Transportation. They were keen on figuring out what is the equivalent to all the fuel tax that's paid currently by the average gas vehicle. As a step towards all vehicle language is not what we have proposed. We are only proposing right now a mileage-based user fee for electric vehicles, and we think about that as a fairness issue about how do we get vehicles that hadn't up until January been paying anything into the transportation system. How do we get them paying something, but doing so in a way that reflects their actual usage of infrastructure? Again, to be more fair than just a flat fee. And but we have not considered what is the next step from there. Plug in fully electric vehicles is a, small number at this point, about 12,000 registered vehicles in the state. And so that gives us a good way to be able to see how this works for class of vehicles or category of vehicles that, again, up until January hadn't been paying anything. So, on section 17, there's reports of the JTOC, for September 30th and December 15th. And, the agency has not had a chance to review those dates. And so I would say that those dates would be dependent upon, what, the agency has time to kind of consider as an appropriate time to come in and report. So I'll sort of hold off on comments until we have feedback on that earlier section. And that is the extent of the mileage based review section. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
And
Okay, so we're now on to section 19. The consideration of vehicle miles traveled in project planning. And thank you for the feedback. Vehicle miles traveled is a factor we use in a lot of ways across both planning functions and project development functions and permitting functions within the agency. And so there are a number of ways data is collected related to vehicle miles traveled, depending on the application we're using. Most often nowadays, relative to like the systems level understanding of, are we making progress towards reducing overall vehicle miles traveled, we're using probe data, which would be basically your information on your cell phones related to your travel and where you're making trips, that gets aggregated at a very high level for a particular geography. So we can understand what the VMT state of Vermont is. We don't know if that's, this is where it gets tricky, because we don't know if that's heavy duty trucks or light duty vehicles or interstate, in-state or out of state people, et cetera. But we do know like the aggregate of how people are using the road, or the duration, how much the roads are being used in a particular geography. Could be at the county level, town level, could be at the block level in your neighborhood. So, and then we also still continue to collect traffic count information, which helps us to cross-tabulate the probe data information that we collect. It used to be we just had the traffic count information, and so we would have difficulty getting sort of a vast understanding of travel patterns in different geographies down to kind of as precise a level as we now have with the probe data. And then we also have count information that is taken by people standing on the corner of the road and collecting intersection counts and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of new technology coming online relative to traffic counts. When you're trying to disaggregate the types of vehicles which are utilizing the system, you have to use a different methodology that allows you to understand what you're seeing. And that's where the hand traffic count methodology, and I think also in some cases, the traffic counters also have a weight function in them to be able to pick up a differentiation between a truck and a light duty vehicle. So for the purposes of this language, just very high level policy, in terms of one of the key goals of the state in addressing greenhouse gas emissions. And it's very much in alignment with the goals under the Comprehensive Energy Plan for the agency is we are trying to, reduce vehicle miles traveled when we can.
So you're good with this definition?
I'm good with this definition. I looked it up. It was slightly different than the federal definition from Federal Highway Administration, but in terms of the actual words, but it was the same sort of exact framing in terms of what federal highway uses.
Okay. I just want to ask a question that could be a super long conversation, and I don't want it to be a conversation, but I just want to bring it up as maybe something you and I can talk about offline, but other people should just know about it. Because then there's also, when you're looking at a development, there are those projections, like, every house has like 10 trips a day.
Trip generation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I totally would love to know how accurate those are based on now the product stuff that you have. And
Probe data.
the probe data.
So the probe data,
Probe?
PROBE, like
Okay.
as in, putting a
Yeah.
thermometer in your turkey.
That's the first thing.
That's
I thought
probe
of.
data. That's
Okay.
probe data.
Okay.
So the probe data, would not necessarily be something that would be correlated with information we would use to, I shouldn't say this because I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've been deep in how we are now applying probe data, but I would say trip generation is, a science that in and of itself, is based on a variety of factors relative to, the land use and the land use functions within a particular area. I would say I would get one of our engineers who works on trip generation to speak with you about how that all figures into our development review process.
Perfect. And this will be something that we might want to talk about when we're looking at VTrans, because right now VTrans has a way to require permits and require different payments via the Act 250 process. But once towns are doing Act 250 in their tier 1 areas, VTrans isn't part of that. So there is a study going on to figure out how we're going to have the regulation and the revenue that's generated from that. So then this will be part of that conversation. So just wanted to make a note of that.
So yes, under section 20, general statement of policy, we would look to reduce vehicle miles traveled within the state when feasible. And then the next section, I'm tracking here, section 21 is related to the statement of policy related to highways and bridges. And within this section, we are looking at when, choosing between the improvement of an existing highway and a complete reconstruction, the agency shall weigh the following factors, including a variety of historic, scenic, aesthetic principles, as well as if it's a federal highway under federal jurisdiction, and then opportunities to reduce vehicle miles traveled or otherwise reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The greenhouse gas emissions is already in there, but this reorients the sentence related to the highway. So that's a consideration when we're doing a planning process for the replacement or reconstruction of highways. This is not at the project level. And then in the broad sense, section 22 in the planning process, we once again had within section C, subitem 5, striving to reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions as one of the planning elements that we are taking into consideration when we are planning for transportation projects and programs within the state. And that's, I think, where we left off, Amy.
Yep. The medical transports, when do you think you might have some language that you could?
I think it's right here in your bill on section 23, placeholder location.
just a placeholder though.
but it says placeholder.
Well, this is the language, yes. Placeholder meaning you haven't decided whether you want to use it or not, but this is the language that we provided to Damien to work from. Is that correct?
It's not in this bill.
Oh, it's not in this bill?
This is
No.
ultra low.
Oh, sorry, I'm just looking.
No, it just says placeholder.
I never
There's
got
no
to
language.
explain.
There's no
Sorry.
language.
That's right. Damien did say that he had just gotten the language and he was still working on
Oh,
it.
so he does have the
He has
language,
the
he's working on it.
language.
Okay.
Yes, my apologies.
That was my question. Did
Yes.
we have the language to
You
start from to work on?
What is it gonna do? Is it a study?
No,
What is,
well,
we don't know.
He'll
So be
present the language
surprised.
and then you'll be surprised.
Okay, good. I mean, it's like, wait,
And that's from that meeting last week, that
Yeah.
joint meeting. That was a really good meeting.
Yeah.
I thought the providers just really stepped up.
I'm gonna spend a little money on
yeah.
it. I told you,
I know, you told me.
and I would say to the committee that in the renegotiation of the contracts with the public transit agencies, that if we could, if appropriations will agree, if we can use at least a portion of that $1 million that was in there to move ahead from the house's point of view for the vehicle miles travel system. And we end up getting the 3 million from the federal government. If we could use that to kick off the effort to get, I don't know whether you call it an office or a group of people that were working on recruitment for, medical transports. It is, the opportunity to start to get that up and running. And we have a year then to think about, at the same time, they're renegotiating those contracts. And I think that, because if we had more of a centralized way to recruit for the, 8 public transit agencies, that at least gives us a base to work off for going forward.
7 public transport. 7, yeah. I was just like, wait a minute.
But
There's only
7?
7. public
Yeah, there's
transit
7.
agencies. Yeah.
I know there's 7 already. I've had it in the back of my mind, if we had 3 or 4, but they would each have 2 agencies that they were working on, and they could, so. Because this is going to be a long conversation about how all this comes together, but I'm hoping that we can act in front of what may be some pretty hefty federal Medicaid cuts. So in advance, thank you for the language. I know you didn't give just placeholder.
I feel like it's a Monday morning.
I thought I gave you a wrong copy.
Right?
So, since Damien is gonna not be here till 11:30, and we have, some other pieces. One of the things that is not in here is joint fiscal has talked about, a placeholder for, what we are out of balance. Because given our position, we are 700,000 out of balance, and they simply have a down and dirty way to deal with this. It's what I'm gonna call it. If you want to talk a little bit about how you would.
Yep, so for the record, looking at the fiscal office, this is language that I'll work with Damien to draft, which would essentially just tell the agency, well, so back up, so The Senate passed two bills out of this committee so far, S-123, the DMV bill, which had a cost of 363,000, maybe something around those lines, and then the forestry bill, S-46, which was 500,000 with 333,000 coming from the P fund and the rest from the Ed fund, for a total revenue decrease of 686,000. So the language would essentially say, and it hasn't been drafted yet, but it would essentially say something along the lines of instructing the agency to revert that quantity during closeout of FY25, which would then be carried forward into FY26 to make the budget whole, essentially, would be the construct that would be written up. So it'd be sort of at their discretion where the funds came from, but it'd essentially be saying somewhere in their budget, when they close it at the end of this year, they need to find $686,000.
It would be,
If those bills pass,
what?
if those bills pass.
So yeah, it would come down to committee of conference, what they do in the House, and if we need to make changes at that point, we could, once the final total is
And I do know
determined.
that I haven't heard a lot of good, okay. I haven't heard the chair of the transportation committee in the House say that he was moving the forestry bill. That's
Still, yeah, I thought it got to move to a tax committee or something, but it's still in the transportation.
yeah,
Okay.
yes.
So is this a normal thing that we do? Or is it a new idea? But new ideas are good.
Well, I don't know, I guess the whole history of on the next couple of years, but yeah, in the past, if a committee has wanted to change around the money, they might specify where the cut is going to come from. Sometimes it's specific to a program, or maintenance, for example, has been the one in the past. This would be something similar, but it would just be giving the agency sort of the ability to decide where they think it's best to come up with these funds. Picking specifically where these funds would come from. And then the other option, as you're aware, we have cut costs or increase revenues. So at this point, it'd be cutting the cost somewhere else.
Okay,
I mean,
cutting the cost in the budget somewhere else, in the
Yeah,
operating
so-
budget? Or taking it from reserves?
They would revert for money that was appropriated in last year's budget. When they go to close out at the end of the year, they would revert an additional $686,000 in appropriations that they're appropriated. And then those funds would be carried forward into your FY26 budget to make up for the revenue decrease from the two bills that were passed.
It just, we don't have to say that, I mean, I'm fine with saying it, but they would just revert it to that happened. That's what they would do.
We have to be in balance when we send the bill. Or we have to have a path.
We want to be.
Well, I would strongly suggest
Yeah.
that we have to live within revenue estimates and recognize what the bottom line is and show a way that we would get to a balanced budget.
But if we didn't, they would revert it because they wouldn't have it. Right.
Well,
But I agree with you. I think it's better to say. But these costs or these tax expenditures, you shall revert the balance. Because normally we haven't done any tax expenditures in here. We've just appropriated. We want you to do this. And so we found something to take out to make up for it. This is a little different since it's.
I mean, traditionally, we used to go to look at maintenance and say, boom. But this year, I don't think we can do that because it's.
Yeah.
We haven't got a
Yeah.
maintenance report. Usually we get
we should get a maintenance report.
where they are on.
Well, part of the problem this year is because in the winter, they really didn't know. Now we've broken, they probably.
They have a dashboard where they're keeping track of it.
Right.
Like, it's not like it's weekly or something.
Yep.
or monthly.
Did you want
I just had one piece of information that I learned yesterday, late in the day, that was interesting to me, and I'm by far not an expert on this, but I was told that Vermont is one of 5 states in the US that does not have a balanced budget statute requiring either the governor to propose and or the legislature pass a balanced budget.
Yeah.
Though, of course, we have a long standing tradition of doing so, but that was interesting news to me, and we were talking about it in light of this dilemma we find ourselves facing at the moment.
Right. I think that's absolutely true, but
Yes.
we have to balance the budget.
Sure.
And if we didn't in the Senate, it would be left in the conference committee to do it alone. But generally, both bodies attempt to do that. And I would say one of the things that I particularly like is coming back to a JTOC committee. We've got 4.5 million in reversions that have to be taken. What's our goal right now is on revenues?
March revenues came in, year to date, we're down 2.335 million under forecast. So about 1% under forecast so far.
So we're in total 2.3 million down, or
In total.
If we end up 3 million down, they would have to find the money to revert. I get that.
Around, it'd be a little over it. Forecast, I think, is what? 320 million.
So just whatever we're down in the forecast, they have to find.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
so we're down now. They're gonna have to be they're gonna have to revert 4.5. And chances are, if we're down March,
You should be buying more guns.
I think I want an electric vehicle. But all of this stuff puts us in a position where, and with some federal money still at risk, and then we are out of balance here by 700. It all comes down to a place where I think it's most important right now that we stay at least up to date on what is going on and the movements that they would be.
Logan, on that operating statement that you showed us, wasn't there a $3.5 million reversion on that thing?
So in FY 25, so the current year that we're in, I think they're estimating reversions when they did the budget was $1 million. And then in FY 26, so the budget you're working on now, I want to say 4.5 was the estimated reversions. It might be 3.5. I'll look.
4.5% or million?
Million.
And when we say reversions, we mean money that they're not going to be able to use that year. But does it also at the same time mean money that they're not going to want to use in a different year for that? Because sometimes for something will
You
be
could push it into the
postponed.
next year. but-
Yeah, so that would have been a reversion means we're not going to need this money.
Or I'm gonna spend it. You're
We're
not saying
gonna
about
spend
needing
it.
it.
Okay, well, so it was planned to be spent, but we're not going to spend it.
Right?
So that's,
You have to cut it.
or they're choosing to cut it.
They have to. Well,
Or, I mean, there's some things that just don't happen, or they happen.
Well, you might try to carry it on the books is what I think Andy's saying, but it's gonna have to be reconciled with.
you can
Yeah, I
revert
just
it out
wanna be
1 year,
clear
and put
about-
it back into the next year's budget, like you can do that.
Well, because the capital fund, we work with reversions and
But it can't go on forever.
exactly, yeah, or it has to be reappropriated. And somewhere there's a policy for that, I bet, or I hope.
Well, and there's somebody,
You're reappropriating to something you reverted the year before.
No, just like, I mean, there's a 5-year limit that we use in, institutions with the capital.
well, and we do get reviewed by the bond houses in even though it's not either in statute or in, our bond rating depends on us balancing the budget. So that will be coming up. We have had a request. There is language in the, that was in the BAA. And the general fund budget adjustment, and there's language that would be, that would match within the T-bill. And it's language that we passed as the Senate, dealing with DigSafe and dealing with,
Who's asking for this?
so the DigSafe, people are asking for it. They asked that it, be included within the budget. We talked to the chair of appropriations, and it would be, it would work within the T-bill. And right now, there's a notification for underground utilities, which is 48 hours. This would move it to 72. It did pass in the budget adjustment, and so can you speak any more to it than that?
It was in both versions of the budget adjustment, the first one and the second one. No opposition from the administration on it, but basically allowing utilities a little more time to get there to market where the underground utilities are, whether they be water, electric, natural gas. We wanted to encourage definitely people to call DigSafe and get those marked, but the 48 hours was problematic. So they wanted to expand their time for these 72.
Right.
And it seems like I haven't heard anybody speaking against it. I don't know, though, I'm sure somebody wants to start digging tomorrow. They don't like that they have to wait 72 hours instead of 48 hours, but we want to make sure it's marked. So,
And if we did it, it would save the appropriation in the appropriation spot, it having to be included in our afternoon committee.
the hope is that T-bill would, the sooner the better. That's why they wanted the BEA, because construction season is upon us. People are going to start digging. They wanted this to happen for this construction season. Since it has a interplay with transportation, the idea was put it in the transportation bill, which doesn't have, the budget not line up, that's still June.
And we would, they do ask that it be included and authorized on passage. So I am, and unless there's objection, I will give the language to Damien, and we will bring that before the committee. So
How much is it?
Pretty much
What's the cost?
no cost. It's just changing the statute from 48 hours to 72 hours. But so when you call DigSafe and say, I'm going to dig up this
Oh, yeah,
culvert,
no,
they have 72 hours instead of 48 hours to get out there and market. So the cost, there's no difference in the cost. I guess they might save some money because they don't have to take somebody on overtime or something. But
I'm surprised that the builders aren't objecting. Because a day, I mean, time is money.
yeah,
But
you got to plan ahead.
They've probably heard.
Right.
Yeah.
But they also know that if they hit a
They don't
gas,
like it when you tell them
if they hit a
that.
gas line with their excavator,
Oh,
they're
no,
going to be away, they're going to lose more.
It's
than
a crucial service and I'm very supportive of the service.
In 2024, Vermont amended its dig safe statute with the intent to move the dig safe notification period to 72 hours. However, due to a drafting oversight, is that you?
No, it's not.
The law that passed only addressed the requirement that requiring people to call in on evacuations. The statute reference, leaving utilities subject to a 48-hour requirement for making, and then it refers to the statutes again. Ultimately, our hope is to achieve prior to construction season commencing in the spring. So all parts of the dig station statute are aligned to 72 hours.
And I think there's no exception for holidays and Sundays, so like you get 48 hours and one of those is a holiday or on Sunday.
And the key would be to make this effective on passage, not just July 1st. So, because they want to get ahead of the construction season. So, you will be seeing language around that.
I feel like this is a little short notice.
It is short notice. If we decide that we don't want to do it here, I suspect it will be in the appropriations bill again.
Okay, maybe we wait for it to go there then.
Well, I'm just bringing it up if it doesn't, it will probably be in the appropriations bill that the Senate has passed it. Yes.
Yeah, while we wait for it in the appropriation.
When did you say it was, initially talked about doing an oversight? It wasn't that, what year?
It was 2024, was last year.
Last year.
Yep. Yeah. So Damien, where did we leave off the review?
Okay, so we were talking about vehicle miles traveled. We had been discussing the definition and how the definition is basically being applied to the agency's mission statement to when you're looking at the difference between improvement and complete reconstruction, weighing opportunities to reduce vehicle miles traveled or otherwise really reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then in section 22, the transportation program, these are requirements for the actual transportation planning through the program. It would be developed in a fiscally responsible manner to accomplish following objectives. And this is adding a fifth objective, which is striving to reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. So those are the pieces of vehicle miles traveled that the agency supported from Kurtzville. Questions?
And we learned when you were gone that the definition that you had, page 27, is not word for word identical, but meaningfully identical to the federal definitions. Yeah.
Okay,
So we are.
good. This is the kind of news I love to come back to.
It's moving faster than I thought it was.
Don't worry, I can slow things down.
Please, you have medical transports. When do you think we'll see that one?
I will have, there's a placeholder here. I will have language in the next draft. So I got a framework from Michelle yesterday. I want to just touch base with her about the best way to draft that language.
Okay.
Before I move forward with the drafting. So
What did we ask if they needed to draft?
on the medical transports, I was asked to include language to support the hiring of volunteer coordinators at the local transportation agencies.
Okay.
So
We are waiting for a proposal from the agency to do that.
Yes.
I've gotten the framework from them, but I have some questions. And so rather than trying to exchange emails throughout the night to get the language, I left a placeholder. So I'm just going to discuss with them this morning, get my questions answered, and then hopefully we'll be able to get the next draft in for tomorrow.
Yeah, as soon as you can get the draft and if you could send it around to the committee.
I will.
We can start talking about what we want to do.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Just a question, so on the process, I guess, because there were, I think, 4 or 5 suggestions that the transit providers had, and this is one of them. Is that the only one that we're putting in now? Or can we talk about the others?
Well,
at some point?
I think we can talk about the others in that. I think from, the conversations that we're for money,
Right,
that we, the money down the hall with the general fund money available for us to do something with, if at least a portion of it, that's an opportunity to take a step.
okay. I thought the DMV, check off might be an easy one.
Well, I think we might, that will come up in the whole conversation.
Okay.
But it won't because we haven't asked Damien to draft anything to that extent. So I think we need to, if you want to see that, we need to ask for that, is my understanding.
I will draft what I'm asked to draft.
And you have not been asked to draft that. So can we explicitly ask Damien to do that?
When, I think,
I know that the agency disagrees with that, but can we just ask him to look into that?
I don't know what they have in the draft. If that's not,
It's not
it's not.
that I know of. So yeah, I didn't see it in the framework. It's just around funding volunteer coordinators.
And as soon as we get to look at that draft, at that point, if it is the will of the committee, we'll ask Damien to draft something.
So you would like to have him draft something, then wait till later in the week when we're voting on Friday, to then ask him to draft something additional
I'm
versus.
hoping that we have a draft we can look at before the end of the day or first thing tomorrow morning.
Great.
I can send you the medical transports language by itself in an email. The volunteer coordinator language before 3 o'clock today.
Mhm.
And just send you that isolated language so the committee can look at it and review it.
Perfect.
I don't have a lot of fight left in me for this bill, so.
All right. Let's finish going through this thing.
Okay, section 24, this is the VIN numbers for ultra low volume vehicle manufacturers, kit cars, and home built motor vehicles. And so this would require the Commissioner of Motor Vehicles in consultation with the Secretary of Natural Resources and representatives of the ultra low volume vehicle manufacturing industry in Vermont to examine processes for issuing VIN numbers to ultra low volume motor vehicles, kit cars, and home built motor vehicles. So just to orient us, a home built motor vehicle is what it sounds like. It's constructed or assembled by an individual using new or used parts or both, and is not a kit car. New parts could include things that the individual is machining themselves at home. Kit car means a motor vehicle that is constructed by an individual from a manufactured kit that includes some or all parts and components necessary. This is everything from a body kit that gets dropped onto an existing chassis and engine, to a chassis and body where the individual acquires the other components, including the drivetrain separately, to a fully inclusive kit that includes everything. And then ultra low volume motor vehicle is a vehicle manufactured by a manufacturer whose annual worldwide production is not more than 325 motor vehicles. That number probably seems arbitrary. It might be, but it is based off of NHTSA is looking at an exception for manufacturers who make less than 325 motor vehicles under a law that was passed about 8 years ago.
Did you pull this language from any other state, other states do?
I pulled the kit car and the home-built motor vehicle language from other states. I did not find ultra-low volume motor vehicle language in other states. It's not to say it's not out there. It's just to say that I didn't find it with the search terms I was using. It's worth noting that,
So what do people with kit cars do now?
so
Have it?
my understanding is that you have to apply to the state for a VIN. I don't know what that process looks like. I think that's a better question for the DMV.
And so the micro manufacturers were hoping to avoid that application process where they could just.
They're hoping to streamline it. I think their testimony was that they sell the car in two separate pieces, and in the middle, the individual applies for a VIN. And they're hoping to streamline it so that they can sell the completed car with a VIN. And so I don't know the ins and outs of how that process works at the administrative level. I think that would probably be better thing.
Study.
This is already asking Commissioner of Motor Vehicles to do something, so you'll probably want to check in with the commissioner on this. And the commissioner may be able to just give you a rundown of what that process looks like currently and what it might look like if it's modified.
And can I ask a question about page 30B2 about the inspection manual?
Mhm.
What was the thinking of that? And
This was in the request from the ultra low vehicle manufacturers, so I put their request in here.
so you don't know what part of the
My,
inspection manual that having trouble?
I do not.
My concern that it would be emissions.
Right there. And I think that emissions is part of why you have the Secretary of Natural Resources, because the secretary sets the air quality standards. So,
I've heard that the low mileage vehicles in California have their number is 500,
Low
Okay.
mileage vehicle.
or not low mileage vehicles, excuse me, not more than 325. Sorry, thank you for
Right.
for doing that. The 325 is 500 in California, but they're the only state that I've heard has a number.
and I could look at that.
Okay.
We'd like to know more is it not a cost? It said to create a cost-effective process for certifying the safety of ultra low volume motor vehicles. Is this a not cost-effective now? Like what's
I don't.
we don't know what the problem is.
Yeah, I have to apologize. I don't have a lot of answers for you.
They don't have any process now.
No, but they can get a VIN
They could-
number.
Well, no, is it the lack of a VIN number, but this is about the safety inspection.
Yeah.
So can they go, if you took a kit car or an ultra low volume car or a home car to your service station and said, I want to get this inspected, do they say, well, I can't inspect it? Is it because they can't tie into the tablet or?
Why don't we get their representative here in the building to come in, and we'll get the connection.
Right, or if DMV just knows on their own. I don't want to take them away from building their car.
Yeah, well,
They could do by Zoom.
we'll get both of them in.
All right. And this would require a report back by January 15th of next year. And it's worth noting, it's just a report back. It would be up to all of you to decide to actually take action on any proposed changes or identified changes in there, which the agency or the department may or may not support. This is language that was requested by Senator Harrison on railroad lease extensions. So last year, the T-bill modified this section to remove the requirement that the Agency of Transportation get the approval of the General Assembly prior to agreeing to a lease extension for state-owned railroad property. This would restore the requirement for approval of the General Assembly, or if the General Assembly is not in session, approval of JTOC. And then it does require Also that the secretary notify the committees on transportation within 10 calendar days after entering into any lease or agreement pursuant to subsection B relates to agreements to preserve continuity of service, allowing for short-term leases or operating agreements for not to exceed 6 months. And this requires notice within 10 calendar days after doing that. And then it preserves notice requirements that were added last year in subsections. So.
Just reverting to the old.
So, right, so that section would take effect on passage. The remaining sections are effective on July 1, 2025. I know we discussed the other change that was mentioned on, the dig safe language also taking effect on passage. So I would just modify the effective dates when I get that language in, assuming the committee decides to put it in this bill and not into the big bill.
Be up to the committee.
I'm very in favor of this language and I appreciate Senator Harrison taking time to review it, having it included.
Go ahead.
I am not. And I'm thinking there's a lot more to it than ECI here. I've got a lot of questions and I don't know if we're short on time. First I've seen it other than knowing it was on the wall. So I don't know.
The committee, Andy can probably speak to it better than Jenny, the rest of us. He was on the committee last year and they worked on this.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember, there was complications and we talked about this last year with Senator Harrison. And so I would at least want to have the agency to come and remind us why they requested this change and some of the federal rules around these leases and things like that. So I just wanted to be reminded what the issues are, because I remember there were issues.
We'll get the agency to come in on this.
They say no, it's out. It's like everything else. Yeah, I got.
So at this point, this went faster than I thought.
Good.
And, but I think the big language will be the language around medical transports. And as soon as you can get us a copy of that, Damien, send it around to each of us. And it will be the first thing on the document in the morning.
All right, I will that as soon as we wrap up here and get a sense of that, and then I'll get the language drafted and out to everyone. And then we can go from there. I will get it.
I will. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not really feeling like myself today or really up for kind of debating some of the points that I was really passionate about with the bill last week, but I did just want to note that I'm very sad about where we landed so far in this bill, because I think we unfortunately have not heard from witnesses who cared about issues that I raised in S75. I think the language is watered down and is very adherent to what the agency of transportation would like to see rather than what members of this committee would like to see. But at this point, I have to focus on other topics because I had a constituent who was abducted in Colchester, as I noted on the floor. And I would like to note that you sent an email to the committee saying that you did not want to hear from the witnesses that I had identified today. Although on Friday, that had been my understanding was we were going to hear from Drive Electric Vermont, AARP. I know we have Kelly coming on Thursday, but I just wanted to note that I think that this has unfortunately been a I just don't like how the process rolled out, and I'm sad that this is kind of where we landed because There's no rate to charge language in here. There's things that were asked for last minute that have gone in when there are things that I asked for very early on and have reiterated that are not being discussed. So I feel like the process has been, I just don't like how it went down, and I just want to voice that. And I'm happy to vote for the bill. I don't want to present or be a part of the report of the bill. But you've got a vote for it, and I'll stop bringing up the witnesses or the issues. Other than that, I just
I
don't have the
would
capacity to do that.
say at this point, the one piece that was not in the bill that you asked about was the complete streets.
There's not rate to charge either, so.
Well, the complete streets would, I think it was my understanding that there was an attempt to work around the charging, but the complete streets language, the agency opposed. And I think it, because you brought that up ahead of time, we should bring that language back, and the committee should look at that. And if you have people that are not on the list that you would like to testify on that,
Yes.
we will bring that up on Thursday.
Okay, so just to be clear, you're saying out loud in this meeting.
As
you
I
would
did,
like to
and-
hear from these folks. So I'm not gonna get an email. in 2
So,
days that says, "Don't want me to hear from
you know, I'd like to see who it is before you do that,
It's the
but we should,
regional planning commission folks that I had asked for before.
if you can give us 2 or 3 names to do that, we will get them on this schedule on Thursday.
I believe our committee assistant already has those names because they were previously believed to be that they were invited for today.
So,
It just is a bummer, like,
so at this point, I think it's time to go offline, and we will be here first thing in the morning. And I think the first thing